Hello, everybody who is here live, and for anyone joining in the recording afterwards. My name is Kurt Mills. I'm the Executive Director of the American Conservative. Pleased to be joined here today by our Managing Editor, Jude Russo, and most importantly, Ryan Gerdusky, who is a contributing editor here at the magazine and wrote our November-December cover issue. Jude. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Beautiful cover. Great magazine.
Yeah, I think, frankly, the best issue of the year. And so we were honored to have Ryan's contribution. And we're resuscitating here in late 24, going into 25, the editor's calls for each issue that subscribers or just onlookers or lurkers can kind of hear what the hive mind is here at TAC. So without further ado, we're going to dive into the piece itself and then also just talk about what's germane. For anybody listening afterwards, we're speaking on Friday, December 20th at noon Eastern. So if the government collapses or something happens in the succeeding hours, not our fault. So,
and by the same token, if you are on this live, against future disaster, just put any questions you have during the talk into the chat, and we'll go through those at the end and try to get to everybody.
Cool. Question number one. Since I guess it's been over a month now, so about 6 weeks since the election, I think it's reasonable to note the Democratic capital D mantra on this election has evolved from the shock of the largest defeat at the hands of the Republicans, arguably since the Cold War, to something more nuanced and self-defending. Proposition one is that this election was not that big of a mandate for Trump. I have seen innumerable number of folks citing the fact that Trump in fact did not win a majority of the votes. He's going to finish just shy of 50% in the popular vote. First time that's happened, I believe, since for a person to win the presidency and not win the majority in that manner since the Clinton years, when the election was quite split. Secondly, within Democratic ranks, I've seen a lot of people arguing that this is just Kamala Harris's fault. If they had had anybody else, if they had had an open process in July, that they wouldn't have had such an enfeebled candidate. And then from the Harris camp, which apparently still exists, hoping to preserve her capital, maybe for a governor's run in California in 26 or a future presidential run in 28 or on, there is an argument that this is effectively just Joe Biden's fault, that no Democrat could have won. In the face of that, Ryan Gerdusky, contributing editor here at TAC, says that this was a realigning monster election. Ryan, how do you respond to the Democrats saying this was no big deal?
Well, I think also it's important that, like, within the first 2-3 weeks, they didn't have at all a response. It was really like the resistance had been sucked out of the room. And even now, I mean, there was no large scale protest. I don't hear of any planned women's march. And I think that you have to make an excuse. You have to sit there and say, how this was somehow responsible. And now they've completely changed the trajectory, saying, oh, look, the billionaires are in charge. It's Elon and Trump's presidency versus, and that's really who's in charge of everything. I think that the moving narrative is their attempt to have some kind of narrative, because they don't know, one, they don't have a leader of the Democratic Party. Two, we're really in the very truly first post-Obama Democratic Party, where he is a non-factor. And somebody I know who has a relationship with Michelle Obama said he doubts if Michelle will ever do anything political ever again. Not that she was essentially political, except to right-wing boomers who believe she was always going to run for president. And they have to figure out kind of some way through the forest to have kind of a path forward. It's interesting right now with the Democrats. You're seeing, even in Congress, this continued fight between the old guard and the new wing, like the fight over AOC getting a committeemanship. and her being denied by an 80-something-year-old because Nancy Pelosi had one more win. It's so I'm not shocked, I'm not surprised, but there is clearly a governing mandate. More importantly than just winning the popular vote, Trump also is above water with his approval ratings. He's enjoying a 55-56% approval rating in the Emerson poll, and YouGov had him down, but there were several Marist had him up, and they approve even of his appointments in his cabinet, which the Democrats thought they could make that the argument, the fighting line, and it hasn't really worked. So I think it's a party lost, looking for a message, looking for a cause, and looking for a leader, and that's why you're seeing a moving argument as to why they lost, who to blame, and how do they define opposition to Donald Trump.
Yeah, you preempted actually a future question of ours. Just as a quick pushback, also as a factual note, the ranking member who beat AOC is 70, not 80. And
sorry.
It's the ranking membership, not the chairmanship. Assuming the Republicans can get their act together and elect a Republican speaker, which we'll also get into. Why don't you tease out real quickly, as just a close to that first question, what your essential thesis of the piece is, and why you think that counteracts that line of critique. And I know it's an unusual thing, but 45% of the country, I think in short order, is going to believe some version of these marching orders. Trump did not get a big mandate. The party's got a deep bench. We'll be fine in 28. Trump's going to make it a right-wing country, and we're going to oppose it. All is fine. Why do you think that that's not accurate, and that actually the Democrats have a much bigger problem heading into 28 than that narrative implies?
Because of the swing, so the piece is called "The Governing Majority." If you can keep it, obviously taken from the Benjamin Franklin quote. If you look at how Trump performed in swing states, he blew it out of the water in most ones. It really wasn't as close as people thought it was. I don't think, besides Wisconsin, any was within a point. I think Wisconsin was the only, maybe Michigan, but I don't think Michigan. I think Wisconsin was the only within a point. And he brought people to the Republican Party the way that Nixon did in their very first attempt. I mean, Passaic County, which has never voted for a Republican on the federal level since it's become a majority Hispanic or plurality or Hispanic county, Muslims in the suburbs of Detroit or in Detroit proper, Florida being blood red, just absolutely not even questionably a swing state anymore. Working class Black families, which was impossible to think about. And even, I had a conversation with several people on the campaign saying, is this possible? Could this really actually happen? And they were doubtful. I mean, they were even doubtful, saying, I don't know if polling is going to oversample this. So this new configuration over who was willing to cast a ballot vote for Republican, because there are certain communities that would have rather chop off their arm than cast a ballot for Republican. And I think part of it that is underestimated is how organic it was. There is essentially no real Republican Party in the Bronx. There's no real Republican Party in Cicero, Illinois, or in Los Angeles, or in places that there were no ads being run. There was no ground game. There was no door knockers. And Trump managed to win precincts or increase support by double digits in these areas. It was an organic movement towards him and towards his message. And I think that if it continues, if that momentum continues, idea of making New Jersey a swing state again and reconfiguring a map that has been fairly fixed since the year 2000. I mean, we're basically still working with the 2000 map of what is swing states, what is not swing states. It's a little different, but it's not tremendously different. Will be important for a governing majority if Republicans do very well. The idea of a 12-year-long Republican presidency of this term and then 2 more following terms is not impossible. And when you have that, you have a real opportunity to remake the country as in your own philosophy.
Also preempting for future questions. So without further ado, Jude.
Yeah. So I think that one thing that your piece does pretty well for us is get into the details of what Trump did right during this campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I think that really it is one of the most complete most rational postmortems on the general election we've had so far. Please subscribe. You also obviously did the magisterial postmortem on the DeSantis campaign, Cousins over at the Spec.
That was for my Substack that they asked to republish, and it went way better than I expected, and I should have left it on my Substack. But that's besides the point. I didn't write it for them. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no. So I think that just the question is, what did Trump do right that DeSantis didn't do right? Or is it complete apples to oranges? Could DeSantis never have replicated the type of operation that Trump was running?
So I was invited to two DeSantis quote unquote influencer, because I hate that term, influencer meetups, one over the phone and one in person. And what was obvious to me from a very quick moment was, one, everyone there had been on the Ted Cruz, almost everyone there had been on the Ted Cruz campaign in 2016. And no one had ever won an election nor figured out how to beat Trump in an election. And what I said to DeSantis was two major things. One, your background is far more working class than Donald Trump's. And yet he speaks to working class people in a way that you don't, in a way that you are almost afraid to. And also he speaks to the fears of working class people. You know, I know some very successful, very wealthy people, higher income, white millionaires, and they tell me how they're afraid their children, because of their race, will be discriminated from getting a job. That is a genuine fear that middle class, upper middle class white Americans have and say in the privacy of their own homes. And I said to DeSantis, if you were 20 years younger, no matter how smart you were or how good of a baseball player you were, you would not get into Yale. I think he went to Yale, right? Yale or Princeton, one of the two. You would not get into that university because you're a white man and they discriminate. I said, you need to speak to that fear, and he would not do it. There was a genuine censorship among the staff as to what they would and wouldn't say to him, which I thought was very strange. And by the end of the meeting, I was with his campaign manager, and she said, "What do you think?" And I said, we're at an Irish funeral waiting for the body to die. Like, this is very obvious right now that there is no real juice here. Part of it also was circumstantial. When Trump, and I write this in the piece for the American Conservative, in the afterglow of such a big victory, it's hard to overstate how down Trump was two years ago in January, after the midterms were so disastrous, and how many people were ready to move on. And I think that part of Trump's success is the circumstance of him being indicted by the New York District Attorney. Alvin Bragg's decision to make him, to prosecute him for really a crime that everyone thought was nonsensical if they were like even remotely nonpartisan, that made him a victim and made him more relatable. This entire 2 years, Trump has been able to he was always like fairly relatable as a billionaire because we saw him on television and he had been known for decades and decades. But over the course of the 2 years, and I write this in the piece, one, being prosecuted turned him from a bully on the internet to a victim, or someone sympathetic rather. And his choice of medium of going on podcasts made him far more relatable. Because you want to hear Trump talk about aliens, there's a podcast for it. How about, talk about the tax situation or immigration or Epstein, or you name it. There's a podcast where you could hear Trump talk about, when he joke about cocaine or Frank Sinatra or whatever, there's a podcast for it. And he became a far more relatable figure and a more sympathetic figure. And it became easy to be associated as a Trump supporter. Famous people were willing to be Trump supporters, and everyone kind of got the okay. There was a destigmatization during this last 2 years. And I think that Trump's ability to relate to people and still hold true to most of his populist message, he's waffled on a couple of things, but most of it is very intact from 2016. created the ability to lean heavier, one, with his base of white working class Republicans, and then two, expanded outwards to white working class multiracial groups.
So
Does
that
that make
really
sense?
is radically different from the DeSantis strategy of fortress. We're going to speak to very, very few selected media outlets. We're going to just sort of try to protect the candidate.
And wait, and Jude, let me add one more thing. DeSantis's people on the biggest problem with political consultants, and I speak as a political consultant, is sometimes you get lost in a frame of mind from a certain year, whatever year kind of you came of age, or you had maybe a big political breakthrough, and you kind of always think that that time has never moved. DeSantis' people's decision to make abortion the issue of evangelicals in Iowa was extremely short-sighted. Maybe about a third of evangelicals no longer attend church. They just evangelicals. They're not moving on one particular issue. It's not 2000 or 2004 anymore. And a lot of people in that room who would come from Ted Cruz world would be great if the whole nation was Texas and the year was 2004. It's not all Texas and it's not 2004, and they couldn't see the time. They didn't know what year it was, and that was palpable talking to them. So that's another little thing. Kurt, do you want to, or Jude?
Did you have one more? Or do you want me to move on to our?
Go ahead. We've got a couple of things that we're gonna circle back on here, and then I see we do have questions coming in, so I don't want to run too long.
At the risk of I'm at no risk, because you're the beauty of you is that you'll just say it as like it is. You've been associated over the, and I've been familiar with your work since 2015 when we both worked for the same parent company over the Examiner and Red Alert Politics, RIP. And we've basically been ideological fellow travelers since Trump came down in 2015. I do recall, though, that for a number of years, and especially with your association with DeSantis, that you were somewhat in the Ann Coulter school of the first administration wasn't so great, folks, and maybe the problem is the principal himself. Obviously, Mr. DeSantis didn't win. Obviously, Trump came back. I think we're all kind of all over that now. I don't know exactly where Ann is on this. I haven't spoken to her for a few, since I think the spring.
I talked to her. I had dinner with her a couple of days ago, and Ann said to me, "The future of Western civilization rests on Donald Trump's hands. Sleep well, folks."
All right. Yeah, fair enough. So again, do you agree with that? How optimistic are you? Do you think he's changed? What do you think this is going to be like? Because what really strikes me is it's a weird kind of thing where, like, I think a lot of new blood came into DC, and then also a lot of people who were quite Trump hostile are now his biggest fans. That there's like this weird energy, I would say, in DC, but also in Trump supportive areas of the country, where it's like the 17 to 21 didn't happen. So how calibrated are you? Do you think it's going to be a rerun of the first one? Do you think he's basically unchanged, which is a fair perspective to have, and man is nearly 80, or do you think, like, actually he's got real pedigree now? He knows what he's doing. This is a pretty different team, principally with obviously the VP elect is a much different generation of politician
And philosophy.
predecessor, Mr. Pence. And so where are we on the Grodusky enthusiasm, optimism? And please give the stenographic truth, please.
No, I mean, listen, I don't care about like making friends with anybody. So I didn't think the first term was an utter disaster. I wasn't as pessimistic as Ann was. I think there were a lot of good things, but on immigration, which was the reason I voted for him when he came down the escalator, when he said Mexicans are rapists, I said, here's my guy. I think that he he did waffle on a couple things. I think when you look at the second term, the question is this Donald Trump's retribution or Donald Trump's swan song? Is this what he wants his legacy to be defined as? And so he really wants Joe and Mika to love him forever? Or does he want this to be I will remake the future of the nation in my image? I think that there are certain people in his orbit now that weren't there 8 years ago that are really positive. I think Elon Musk is probably a net positive, although Elon does suck on legal immigration, but he is very good on the border. JD is a great net positive, and I worked for him in 2022, so I'm a little biased, but I think he's a great net positive. And there were some other people. The fact that he picked Tom Homan to do mass deportations, that's not a joke. Tom knows.
Former longtime TAC contributor, Tom Homan.
But Tom's not a bullshit artist. Like, he knows his stuff. He's a really good pick for those things. So am I optimistic? I kind of can't help but be optimistic. One, because we have no choice, but two, also because it feels like a time of optimism. So I don't know. That's where I'm at. I am more optimistic, I think, than the average person who was a little pessimistic during his time in office was. It is a new team, and there is a seriousness in which he's approaching a number of issues. And I think that a lot of the worst hangers on did not get jobs right away. A lot of people who, not that everyone is a superstar who did get jobs, but a lot of them did not get jobs. And you can never overestimate the willingness of people to lose themselves for power. That being said, Susie Wilds getting picked over Brooke Rollins is a great thing. Rubio being picked over Grinnell is a great thing. Holman being picked is a great thing. Kristi Noem, we'll see. I mean, I'm just going to make a very crude joke, but I'm not going to do it. I'm an American conservative. But there is a lot of good people around. JD Vance being the vice president is like, I could not believe it. I mean, when I was first told that JD was in consideration, was like in maybe like the spring of 2023, and I said, "There's no effing way he's going to have run two white guys on a ticket anymore." And he did, and they won by it. And I think it's a game changer. I was completely wrong for a long time until it became like I was being told, no, it's real. So it's the question of, does Donald Trump really want a beautiful obituary from the New York Times, or does he understand he is Richard Nixon, and these people will never, ever, ever truly love him, and he will be hated by them long after he goes to his eternal rest? I don't know. I don't know that answer, and that's the mindset in which he is approaching the presidency. But so far, he's getting everything he wants. Time Magazine, Mark Zuckerberg meetings, ringing the bell at the stock market, everything a boy from Queens like myself could ever dream of, like being loved by Manhattan. He's getting. It's a matter of, is that persuadable enough for him to give away on certain points, or is it possible that he just is like, nope, pedal to the metal, I don't care because I won them over and I got everything that I wanted and I'm the winner? I don't know. We'll see as it goes along. I am more optimistic than I was probably in 2017 as I saw some hires go.
I wasn't going to ask this, but overnight I saw some clips from the American Fest, whatever it's called, that Charlie Kirk's putting on in Arizona, and I know that I believe the Prestige speaking slot was for Mr. Bannon, and I did see that he explicitly said Donald Trump's a nice man, he doesn't want retribution, but I do. We do. I mean, what does that mean? What does that actually look like? Do you actually think that apparatchiks within the administration, I mean, just top of mind would be someone like Mr. Patel for FBI director? Do you think that cadres within Trump's administration will pursue retributive actions against Democratic opponents that will actually make the stuff of liberal fan fiction seem more?
Yeah, I only ever wish Trump was what the liberals said he was. Listen, had Trump lost, he would have died in prison, right? I don't think that there is anyone who would have thought that the Democrats would have ever stopped had he lost. I don't think Kamala Harris would have pardoned him. I don't think Kathy Hochul would have pardoned him. I don't think that you know, they would have just been like, oh, okay, it's over now. No, go about the rest of your life being a successful billionaire with a beautiful family. No, they would have tried to make sure he went to jail for the rest of his life and died in prison. That's what they dreamed of for him. I don't think that that completely goes away. I think that that's very, very real, that memory. As far as what Steve Bannon says, I don't take a lot of what Steve Bannon says very seriously. There are people who genuinely lead moments, and there are people who jump in front of parades and say they're leading it. And Bannon is more of the latter than the former. So not really super interested in what he's saying or doing. And I don't think that he's as much on the inside as some people would say that he is. He'll probably, whatever. I don't believe that. Maybe he is, but I don't think that.
You know, from the first term that Trump actually isn't that retributive. I mean, like I mean, like the number of people that, again, I'm not saying this is like necessarily the most commendable behavior, but like the number of people that have been at odds with Trump that have just flipped like this. I mean, Lindsey Graham syndrome, and Trump gets them in. Like, I mean, Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State. I know you've applauded that relatively, anyways. But like, you know, I mean, they had an absolute.
Oh, he was little Marco. Yeah,
exactly.
They were measuring penis sizes on a debate stage. Who can forget that?
To be absolutely fair, like, you know, Vance has his own Never Trump history as well, and so it occurs to me, and then I remember when Trump had the sort of transfer of power meeting with Obama in 2016. It was extremely diplomatic and complimentary of Obama. I don't want to super index on this, but obviously Obama had you know, some adjacency to what became Russiagate, and I think that destroyed the relationship. But I mean, even now, I mean, the relationship with Biden seems fine-ish, and you haven't seen Trump going out of his way to you know, rain down fury on Harris, and I haven't even heard that much about, you know, going after deranged Jack Smith, quote unquote, et cetera, et cetera. It just seems like his default setting is if people aren't coming at him, he doesn't really seem like he wants to do it. And so I think this question of principle versus cadres is pretty important. But you're saying that the ban is.
Well, I think that those are good points. But what is the point of going after senile Joe Biden?
I think
the State Department and the FBI being cleared out is a much more important goal than going after Joe Biden. I think having Tom Homan doing raids of the new Venezuelan gang is far more important than person insulting your opponents. And I wrote this in the piece. I think it's also very important that Donald Trump has not been on Twitter, because no one really hears from him very often outside Truth Social, and no one's on Truth Social. So I don't know. I mean, I haven't really heard speaking him very much whatsoever, but also, you know, maybe it's, but as we saw in the first administration, it's not always up to him. It is up to the people you hire. I think Kash Patel as an FBI director, and it looks like he's going to get through, is a much different pick than his first FBI director. There was no equivalency of Tom Homan. There was no equivalency of half of these people. And those who have been with him through the last 8 years are much different than they were 8 years ago. Charlie Kirk, who is a close ally to the president and has an inside track, is a different man than he was 8 years ago on a number of beliefs. JD Vance is obviously much different than Mike Pence, but the people around him who have been lasting, they do remember him going to jail, him getting shot almost twice. A number of things have changed in the dynamics that I think changed the overall equation. And I think that who is a real threat and a real enemy to him, it's not Kamala Harris. I mean, she's a wine mom with no children, and Joe Biden is a senile, delusional old man. It is the people in the State Department, the people in the FBI, and other administrative state positions, and they don't have names. No one knows who they are. It doesn't really matter. So I think time will tell. I'm willing to give him a grace period of a couple months to a year to figure out who's going to do what. But the speed at which he has been appointing people shows there seems to be somewhat of a plan. And 8 years ago, it was just Jared Kushner and Reince Priebus picking people out of a hat. So it is a much different, it's clearly a much more well-organized machine. And you can tell that pretty easily. And it's just a question of, you know, where do these people take it and how far they take it? Because ultimately the president's only as good as people they hires.
The American people agree with you. I mean, I think it's somewhat astonishing that the transition has a positive approval rating, considering that, you know, the level of negative media coverage on some of these nominees. These nominees are objectively outside the Overton window. People like Hegseth, Gates, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, yeah.
And like, you know, the majority of Americans, I mean, more Americans per polling than voted for him approve of the transition. So thus far, so he's clearly in a honeymoon, more than a honeymoon than he's ever been in as a political figure, or president-elect. I again have to play devil's advocate here, though. Are we getting a
Your favorite job?
Are we getting a preview? Though right now, real time again, Friday, December 20th, noontime Eastern. Are we getting a preview of what the Trump governance program will look like with this Hill fight, which is key Trump ally tweets something that causes a problem. Weak Speaker of the House has no idea what to do. Speaker of the House haven't had any idea what to do in Republican politics for like 30 years. And this is the wheels are going to come off potentially even before they swear in, which again, there are parallels to that in 2016, which is that the Russia stuff started marring Trump's ability to govern before he even took the office. What is the argument against that? Like, no, actually, this will be fine. Like, you know, this is they're going to have, you know, Trump's not exactly, Dwight Eisenhower in terms of his operational style. But like, you know what? He knows what he's doing. They're going to get a few things done. It's going to be pretty good. Fear not. And then additionally, no, you know, the American people are a nerd or immune to this anymore. Nobody really cares that they shut down the government, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think this is bad? Do you think this is?
Well, I mean, going into the Christmas holiday and New Year's, I don't think anyone's really paying attention to the government shutdown that much. I don't know how often they are. Aside from when you poll it, they're like, no, we hate this, but they don't actually ever really feel it outside of a few federal employees. I think the bigger question is really, I mean, I think if you look at the Senate seems to be falling in line with Trump, aside from Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. And Susan Collins is in a Democratic state, so she kind of has a little bit more autonomy than everybody else. And Lisa Murkowski is an asshole. So I mean, she just does whatever she wants. That's the dichotomy you deal with those two kinds of people.
Curtis in Utah could be interesting. That's the heir to the Romney Mormon dynamic with Trump. But
right, but there's not overwhelming opposition to Trump in the Senate. There's certainly no one at the level of antagonism that maybe like John McCain had in 2016. None of that really exists. In the House is harder because the Freedom Caucus is very committed on debt deals. There are some members that are probably off their medications at times. There's a lot of thirsty people that really love attention to do something. And this is the place where like an Elon Musk would help. Like when we go into this next Congress, there will be 14 Democrats in Trump districts, 3 Republicans in Harris districts. And one of them is Brian Fitzpatrick, who's just enormously popular in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So there's only 2 that are really vulnerable. And Lawler's very popular too. So you really have one that's very, very, very vulnerable, which is Don Bacon. But you have 14 Democrats. And if like an Elon, not an Elon figure, but Elon himself was committed to sitting there and saying, well, you have to get certain bills over the threshold in the House, you find it in those 14 members. There's also probably another dozen members whose seats are moving to the right so quickly that they're not yet in Trump districts, but they will be in a blink of an eye. That's where you lean heavily to get your message across, but that means you also have a much more moderate House than maybe you would want. And it is the problem of the current makeup of the Republican Party, where you have basically inside the House of Representatives, as much as the executive branch is very much a Trump party, and the Senate has become a bit more of a Trump party. The House is still very much, I mean, the House is still Boehner's party. There's very, very, very few populists genuinely in the House. Without Matt Gaetz, there's even fewer. Some have put their MAGA bumper sticker on top of their Bush bumper sticker, but it's the same car. And I think that's where you really come into a problem, is in the House. But you know, let's see see how Trump can govern and can make peace with the Chip Roys of the world and the Don Bacons of the world, which are basically in two totally different camps as far as they see it.
Dude, one more question from you, I think, and then we'll go to audience questions.
I hope
Yeah.
this made sense. I wasn't just rambling.
Oh, no. At least not.
Okay.
And even if you were, we love it. We're paying. No, so I mean, this is sort of the $1 million question, forcing you to answer the, question that is the premise for the piece. But come 2028, what do you think the party looks like? Who's in the catbird seat to pick up from Trump? And do you think that the Dems will really have responded to this at all? Do you think that we're looking at 40 years in the desert, like they
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats have a few really strong candidates in 2028. Wes Moore is no joke. Josh Shapiro is no joke, although I've never met a Jew with a black scent like that before. There are a few, but Reginald Moore is she's not a serious player at all, and I don't think Pete Buttigieg has a big future. And I honestly don't think Gavin Newsom is actually a very serious player. He just lives on Fox News and in Republicans' nightmares. But there are a few that are serious people, and they shouldn't be undermined. They shouldn't be underplayed. It will be an open seat, so we'll see it. I don't think the Democrats will be nominating a woman for a very, very, very long time. I would actually be surprised if they nominate a woman in the next like 8 years. But Wes Moore is a very serious candidate. Josh Shapiro is a very serious candidate. It's not something to just take as a joke. Can the Republicans make this a more permanent coalition? I mean, well, there's two things. One, J.D. Vance is very clearly the man in waiting. He is the vice president. There's only been one former vice president, who's ever sought the party nomination and lost, and that was Mike Pence, and he was running against Trump. Though I don't know if he could have won even without Trump, but if 2020 was different, he certainly probably could have got the nomination. So J.D. Vance is absolutely the leading contender, but there are people who will challenge him for the primary nomination. You're already seeing this, by the way, on social media. There is a whole economy of influencers, Republican conservative influencers, who are paid to say. They get paid to tweet certain opinions about politics. And you're already seeing people coming out who are like Vivek friendly, or I don't know, Vivek's friendly, or they're they're friendly towards one or the other person, and they're already saying we can't really trust J.D. Vance. There will be a challenge to him, but he will be the most likely person because Twitter is not a real space, but there will be a challenge. And the question is how much, one, do Democrats continue to double and quadruple down on we should have no borders, mass immigration is a great thing, Black criminals should never be prosecuted, which was a major reason I think a lot of Asians and Hispanics looked around and said, this is not my party. If wages can go up, if we avoid a global war, and if the feeling that life could be better will be very important. If Trump's successful this term, JD's or whoever's first term could be really Trump's second. Like that's what we saw. I mean, we saw it to a point with Reagan, but Reagan did have two full terms consecutively. But that's the opportunity of a successful term this term, is that it could set the next Republican up, that it would really be Trump's second consecutive term. So is the chance there? Yes. What they have to do is they have to continue. For as much as you've heard right-wing conservative pundits say, just give up on blue states, everyone get out, there's no hope. There's a lot of hope in New Hampshire, New Jersey, Minnesota, New Mexico, Virginia to a certain degree. There has to be serious continued investment in these states, the way that we've seen it between 2020 and 2024. There has to be a messaging towards the emerging people who voted for Trump and then voted for Democrats down ballot because they're not super trustworthy on the Republicans yet. And there has to be a further commitment towards working class people. We saw that to a degree during Trump's presidency. Wages did go up and other issues, but there are big problems ahead with the working class on housing, on healthcare, on a number of things that an economic populist message appeals to. But it has to be it can't just be empty words. It has to come up with some policy. We have to have some wins on the scoreboard over the next 4 years.
What did you, if I can inject a little half question before we get to the audience, what did you think of the him backing the longshoremen against USFX?
I think it makes complete sense. I would have done the same thing. If I was his advisor, I would say absolutely great decision. Because only economists or people who like pay so much attention to it will recognize the economic loss of a quarter on your roll of toilet papers, whatever the economic savings will be. Those 60, 70,000 jobs and probably 250,000 family members who depend on those jobs, or maybe more than that, 300,000 will never forgive you for it. And that's to me the question of should we automate all truck drivers? When that question comes and we're not far away from it, you're talking about 1 to 2 million jobs and 4 to 5 million people with a high school diploma primarily who will never earn that kind of living ever again. And it's the NAFTA question all over again. Is it worth the cut of $1 on your food or on whatever your product is for the livelihoods of millions upon millions of people who have no other avenue to obtain that kind of decent middle class lifestyle that we are told Americans should aspire towards?
Yeah, well, and what I found interesting about it was, there are a number of high-level, capitalists who back Trump who have been very against the longshoremen on the automation question, very vocally. I mean, in the first week of this month, Elon was posting videos about how you have to automate the ports. And, these have been high-profile Trump supporters. He came out for the longshoremen, and nobody has said anything. Which, is not in the moments where the GOP has both working class and capital support, that is not the way it usually splits. So it does seem like a serious sort of gesture.
And that's why I am more optimistic on Trump than I was in 2018. I think that listen, Trump's gut instincts when he's not being prepped and pushed and prod are pretty damn good. He didn't so much, and I wrote this in the piece, he didn't so much, have newfangled ideas that no one's ever heard of as much as he saw $1 million bill on the floor, which was the working class, and he picked it up and put it in his pocket. That is really essentially what he did. It's stuff that people have been screaming about for 30 years, and I think enough people have been affected by immigration and the economy and forever wars and the drugs and on the carnage and the real American carnage and the crime that it impacted a big enough people. Buchanan came too early where they had not been affected yet by all the things he predicted. And by the time Trump rolled around in 16 and then 24, they had, Pat was always ahead of his time.
Buchanan came too early is a great turn of phrase. Without further ado, from the audience, first, from Mr. Jim Hemingway, quote, "Yes, Trump won all the swing states, but still, ellipses, the overall popular vote margin was only 1.5%, sort of reiterating a little bit what I said at the top. I'm happy and all, but I'm older than you guys, and these things are fleeting." Dark. He ran ahead of almost all the Senate candidates, accurate. And I think the reason for that is the weakness of Harris. 1.5% is a historically small margin, and we should be circumspect. Response?
It's historically high, considering 1.5 is better than anyone's done in 20 years. And actually, anyone's done except for one election in 32 years, since 1988, whatever, 34 years. No, I'm older than that. It's 36 years. Wow.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
the best. I think it's,
36 years.
I think it is objectively the most impressive Republican to respond, just to interject, but I think it's the most impressive election result for a Republican since 1988.
100%. It's not even questionable.
It was an incumbent, it was a war, and they almost blew it. This was a 95 indicted non-incumbent or quasi-incumbent. And he won the outright.
100%. I totally agree with you. Yeah, the popular vote The thing about this election is the Electoral College is no longer biased towards Republicans, or barely biased towards Republicans. It's not like it used to be. And part of that is because Trump traded so many college-educated suburbanites for the working class voters. That might bite Republicans in the ass in 2 years in the midterms. But if those people who are questioning Trump, and millions, by the way, of minorities chose the couch because they weren't willing yet to vote for a Republican. But if they do, and if a place like New Jersey is a swing state, as it was back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was actually a Republican state. But if those things happen, if he fundamentally expands the map, we may not be seeing a blip in time. We may be seeing the beginning of a new story. And that's just the difference. We are so committed and so much of the belief that the Democratic Party will win these voters back. And maybe they could, but they may not. And I think their commitment towards supporting Black criminality throughout the 2020s, a hyper feminine attitude towards literally everything, transing kids, these things, I still have yet to see any leading Democrats outside a few House members willing to challenge the Twitter army. There's no governor still. There's very few senators who are really outside of like Shapiro's, like, or Fetterman's outright, like they hate. Sorry. Outside of Fetterman or Shapiro's, like, hey, I don't hate the Jews. Aside from that, they will not go a step further and actually challenge their base. And there's so much as they are constantly going to be living and dying by what the left on Twitter says. We have an avenue, and it's a big avenue. They just have to sit there and take it.
All right. Last but not least, Ed Geringer is adamant in the chat on a few things. And I have something to say about it as well. Question number one from Ed with a coda is, quote, I don't buy the claim that the partisan map hasn't changed much since 2000. At that point, Ohio and Florida were swing states, accurate. So were Colorado and New Mexico, accurate. Virginia was red, accurate. And Louisiana was blue. That's inaccurate, respectfully. Clinton won Louisiana in 96. Bush, I looked it up. I'm not trying to be a prick, but
no, I know. I know the map.
Bush won Louisiana by comfortably in 2000. I believe the one that was really close was Tennessee, which Gore narrowly,
right, which he was from.
Mr. Geringer also makes the point that New Jersey was a liberal Republican state in the 80s, as you referenced. Clifford Case, Christine Todd Whitman getting into the 90s now, even Chris Christie were with the Dems on social issues. I think that was accurate when Chris Christie was a city councilman. He later flipped to pro-life when he ran state
governor. Yeah.
You get the point. You get the idea. Number one, Ryan, things haven't really changed. You know what you're talking about. And number two, it was a pre-Cold War, different social landscape. Thank you, Ed.
What's the question, though?
Well, and the question is, respond to the argument, I suppose. I'm just now ad-libbing for him.
Okay, so since 2000, right, the Republicans' presidency has counted on the national L. The L being North Dakota to Texas, Utah or Idaho to the Carolinas. That's the L that gives Republicans their presidency. And a few Midwestern states joined that. And that is how it was. Yes, there are Colorado and New Mexico are blue. I would say Colorado is solidly blue, while New Mexico is, it's pretty blue, but it's not like, it's only, I think, 5 points. It's not tremendous. It's not Colorado, while Ohio and Florida are red, and Georgia is a swing state. Arizona was not a swing state in this election. And Nevada is still a swing state. That map, yeah, there's a few states that have moved around, and states have reddened or made bluer or redder. But when you look with the exception of the Obama 2008 election, which was a genuine wave where North Carolina and Indiana flipped, maybe 8 states in that whole thing have changed. Colorado, New Mexico, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Indiana, Ohio. Those are the 8. Those are the only 8 states that went from solidly one way to solidly the other. And New Mexico wasn't a solid, it was a swing state. And Virginia. Okay, so 9. Most of those states have not fundamentally changed or altered. You know, and the Midwest has always been the Midwest. It was a swing state when Bush was running as well. I think the thing that changes is in this respect, because of the major change is not so much which states are swing states and which states are not swing states. It is the geographical presence of the Americans in terms of the Electoral College. We don't, by 2032, a Republican can win the presidency without winning a single Rust Belt state if they win the entire Southwest, Midwest, you know, Texas, whatever. And we only need one right now, but we'll need 0 in 2032 and beyondwards. Building an alliance with Latinos, where 50-something% of the polling is a little iffy, but about 50-something% of Latino men and a good percentage of Latino women. I think we lost the overall popular vote with Latinos by like 6 points or 7 points, but certainly not the 30-point loss that Republicans are used to losing with. And if Texas is truly going to remain red, which was questionable for a long time, and if Florida is blood red, and Arizona was more than 6 points in Nevada, Georgia is the big question. So is North Carolina, only because of the high percentage of Black voters. But if that is the map of the future, which it is very likely going to be the map of the future, the chances of a Republican winning a presidency are much, much greater than they were 2 decades ago, or a decade ago, or even right now. And the question is how do you continue to welcome them and grow in that idea, in that Trump, in the Trump built, that army that Trump built? That's really the fundamental question, is how does someone do that? And if you add a single state like a New Jersey with the 16 electoral college votes, a New Hampshire with the 4, Virginia with the 13, New Mexico has 5, Minnesota has 10, the opportunity to sit there and have a Democratic presidency becomes much, much more difficult. And if you make them possible for a Republican Senate candidate to winning those states, you make the chances of a Republican supermajority very possible. I will close on one other thing that I have not mentioned. This was the first election. You mentioned the Senate seats, how Trump outran every Republican. This is the very first time, I think in 100 years, that Republicans have 2 senators from every state that their presidential candidate won by greater than 10 points. There are 24 states that Trump won by more than 10 points. That's 48 senators. The other 5 are Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, 2 from North Carolina, and the unsinkable Susan Collins. And have we not run Carrie Lake for everything, apparently in Arizona, we would have had one more. And we only lost Michigan and Wisconsin because Democrats ran 2 third-party MAGA candidates against them, and they split the vote enough ways to lose those 2 seats. The opportunity to add to our coalition is substantially larger right now than one ever has been, and 2, or that it has been since the Nixonian era, which I write in the piece for the American Conservative, which you should subscribe to. Larger than any time since the Nixonian era, and unless something radical happens, and it could, because you didn't expect COVID in 2016, that trajectory is not slowing down, and you could see it because it's happening in places Republicans do not campaign in. There is no Republican Party of the Bronx, or of Los Angeles, or of Compton, or of Cicero, Illinois, or of, frankly, mostly the city of Detroit. Those places don't have effective, real Republican parties as we know it. And yet they all moved independently towards Republicans. Yes, Harris was weak, but the Democratic Party as a whole is not offering them what they used to offer. If we become the party that has real representation in cities, real representation in blue states, real representation in suburban areas, minority suburban areas, we will be the majority party for some time to come, and it will be a governing majority if you can keep it.
This touches on a counterfactual Kurt and I were talking about before the call, which is what if Biden's victory is in fact the exception? What if that is the one-off in a period of secular realignment towards the GOP?
Or what if it was just COVID?
Right.
What if it was COVID and the heightened post-George Floyd excitement, which propel people who don't go out and vote to vote because we had to save the world. And that was really the thing. And also, what if in the long term, and I don't know if this answer is right or not, it's something we'll see as time goes on. Was it ultimately better that Joe Biden won that one term? Is it we are in a better place having a JD Vance as vice president than we would have going to this election as a Mike Pence vice president? Are we better off from a Trump who was indicted, who was shot, who was gone after, who they did try to destroy his life, they did try to bankrupt him? Is he a different and better person because we had Joe Biden? I don't know that answer. We'll find out over 4 years. But it could have been just the last blip in the Obama coalition that he dreamed of.
So in response to that, we have a question from Mr. Hemingway in the chat, and I think this will close us out for the afternoon. So why is the House majority still so small?
Because one, redistricting, right? We lost redistricting fights in New Jersey, Illinois, and California. That was lost us probably between those 3 states alone, 12 seats. New Mexico is the 13th. You can just go down. New Hampshire was a 14th. Connecticut's a 15th. New York changed 3 districts. We would have won all 3 had they not changed mid-year. You can get up to 16 like that. All we have is North Carolina, and Ohio didn't even go hardcore like North Carolina did. Florida did, but Ohio didn't. That would again was 2 seats. And also the fact is we traded working class urbanites for upper white middle class suburbanites. So Ohio's first congressional is no longer, which is the city of Cincinnati, is no longer competitive like it used to be. But and it's moved maybe 5 points to the left, 6 points to the left over the last 8 years. But Grace Meng in Queens, New York, her Asian plurality district has moved 20 points to the right. It's still not competitive, but we are getting there. New Jersey's 9th district, which went for Trump, I think 1 point, and the Democrat won by 6 points. These places are getting there. It takes time. Remember, Nixon won 49 states and lost the House. Reagan won 49 states and lost the House. For a lot of people, the same way that Southern whites and neocons and evangelicals were voting Republican for president and not voting for him in the House, is the same way Hispanics and Blacks and Asians and some still working class whites are doing it still, where they're willing to vote for Republican for president. They've conceded it's a good thing, and they're still trading it out for the Democratic House. And the Democratic House districts, their members' districts, are less Democratic than they were. We've made very blue seats less blue, but we have traded a lot of purple seats, and that is what has happened. In the long run, it could work out, but it's just taking some time to get there.
Cool. And then we have some fighting into questions, but no more questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Jude.
We thank you for joining us, Ryan. It was a real pleasure. Thank you everybody who could join us for this webinar. We're hoping to make this a regular feature moving forward. We were doing it for a while. We stopped last year for a couple of reasons, but we think that it's something good. We like talking to you all. We like having you yell back at us sometimes. So if you are seeing this afterwards, thank you for watching. Please subscribe for this snazzy hard copy of The American Conservative. And thank you. We will see you all next time. Gradusky, thank you for making the time.
Thank you.
So long, everybody. Merry Christmas.